Do you know that I have family in the room? I'm kind of Irish. I aspire to be. Thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to the family in particular for making this possible. I love it here. It's a thrill to be here, and here we go. Okay, this is the title. The answer isn't no. First, special thanks to this country, that's me, in Ireland, with my wife, on our wedding day. Maybe this means more to me than you all. Okay, more special thanks. That's our little boy, Declan. Cute, yes? That's my wife Samantha's confirmation hearing after. It went pretty well. Okay, here's some developments. The United Kingdom has had a behavioral insights team since 2010, using behavioral science to try to make policy work better. The United States has had a White House team since 2014, engaged in very similar work. There is activity in Germany, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Italy, and many other nations. There are behavioral applications, and I'm going to say a little bit about what they are without dedicated office. So you don't need a nudge unit to engage in behavioral science. All you need is people who have a sense of the underlying research. I'm going to say quite a bit about the relationship between behavioral science and democracy, but I'm going to give you a little breaking news, which I just got within the last couple of weeks. There is now a study which I'm involved in of the United States. This little echo noise is actually intentional. It's to distract you from any errors in the exposition. So breaking news is we now have data on what people from Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, France, Hungary, Denmark, the United States, and possibly one or two others, think about nudges. And I'm going to say a little bit about what they are. But the extraordinary finding, which I did not expect, is that what people like and what they dislike is essentially the same across countries. And what they like is much more numerous than what they dislike. So the idea of using behaviorally informed tools to help people with respect to the environment or health or finances, that seems to be commanding an international consensus. Okay, that's breaking news. Okay, here's the World Bank, 2015. The World Bank, as you may know, is not the most avant-garde organization. If you were looking for the economic equivalent of the avant-garde, you would not look at the annual report of the World Bank. Nonetheless, in 2015, there is an annual report which is explicitly and exclusively focused on behavioral insights, emphasizing the wide variety of opportunities here for protecting health, protecting children's cognitive development, protecting energy and the environment. And in fact, just tomorrow, there is going to be an announcement from the World Bank of the creation of a global insights team, a dedicated office using behavioral insights to help with development. Okay, this is from just last month from our president, and it's a historic document. I hope the dryness of the content, we're going to be talking prose here rather than poetry, will not distract attention from the magnitude of what happened last month. Said our president, a growing body of evidence demonstrates that behavioral science insights about how people make decisions and act on them can make this government better serve the American people. The federal government should devise its policies to reflect our best understanding of how people actually act. Okay, so agencies, our government said, must identify opportunities to help people have access to public programs by streamlining processes, to improve how information is presented to consumers, to identify programs that offer choices and carefully consider how the presentation and structure can effectively promote public welfare, For policies with a regulatory component, agencies should combine behavioral science with ongoing review of existing regulations, and there has to be a yearly report until 2019. That last part is very clever. President Obama isn't going to be president in 2019, and this executive order is essentially calling for continuation of the processes. Now, the basic idea here is that when our government is trying to help people get educated, get job training, save for retirement, whether the issue involves poverty or environmental protection, there's a dedicated office whose goal is to use behavioral insights. Okay, how did we get here? That's what I'm now going to explore. Okay, from 1960 to 2000, in academic circles all over the world, certainly the ones in which I traveled, there were three dominant ideas. Human beings are rational. Human beings calculate probabilities and maximize expected value, and they respond to incentives. So the basic idea is if you want to reduce behavior, increase its price, and if you want to increase behavior, subsidize it. And that could drive public policy in a wide assortment of areas. Gary Becker, winner of the Nobel Prize, is kind of famous for pressing these three ideas. And Richard Posner, federal judge and the leading analyst of economics and law, has emphasized all three as well. Okay, here are some behavioral objections starting in the 1970s. First is people show present bias. And we're going to do a little experiment in this room on present bias. Please, if you would, think of yourself tomorrow on a beach in the most beautiful sunny place you've ever been. Two of you didn't do that. Think of yourself on a beach in that place. We need 100% participation. Okay, what happened for all of you who did that, the 100% who did, your seats are attached to neurological things. What happened for each of you is that a part of your brain lit up. It's an identified part of the brain, we can call it the narcissistic part, which suggests when you think of yourself, that part of the brain lights up. And it happened for all of you. Now, if you would, think of yourself on a beach a year from now in the most beautiful place you've ever been. You in a bathing suit on that beach in late 2016. Now what happened is that for a certain percentage of you, that same part of the brain lit up, but for a certain significant percentage of you, that part of the brain did not light up. Here's what matters, and forgive me, by the way, for my American accent. It's kind of grating, I know. I can't do anything about it. That part of your brain did not light up for a significant percentage of you. And the kicker is, for those of you, I haven't taken the test, so we can say those of us, for whom it did not light up, we will rather have €1 today than €2 next week. If when we think of ourselves a year from now, that person is a stranger and not us, we are going to suffer from present bias. We think of our future self as a stranger. If the narcissistic part of the brain doesn't light up when you think of yourself from a year from now, you are going to treat that person more or less like someone who isn't you. And a significant percentage of the population is like that. That means they are likely to fail to save for retirement, to engage in health-related behavior that's risky or dangerous, and basically not to take precautions to safeguard their future selves. Now, even for those of you for whom that part of the brain did light up at thinking of yourself a year from now, even for those of you for whom it did light up, there's a risk of present bias. of thinking that tomorrow's self really matters, next year's, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years, not so much. That raises a problem from the standpoint of the conventional economic prescription. If your future self is a stranger, then you're not going to be fully rational with respect to protecting her or him. If your future self is a stranger, then imposing incentives that protect that future person, that won't work. That's not you. Okay, second point is people are loss averse. That means that losses are much more important than corresponding gains. For someone to lose 10 years, okay, we're going to do a little experiment here also. This part of the room, I'm going to give you all 10 euro. You're welcome. For this part of the room, you all have to give up 10 euro at the end of the lecture. Sorry, you're going to have to hand it over there. Now, if you really believe that, I think you didn't, and you're right not to believe it. If you really believed it, those of you who expect a 10 euro loss were much sadder than you were happy to get a 10 euro gain. That is, a loss from the status quo is much more painful than a gain from the status quo is pleasant, and I'll give you some data on that. It raises real problems from the standpoint of predicting the effects of policies. We know that people don't always deal well with probability. We know that people can be unrealistically optimistic, and we also know that people have limited attention. I'm going to say a little bit more in a moment to try to clarify those. Okay, with respect to probability, the availability heuristic says that we tend to think that an event is probable if we can think of a recent occurrence. There was a time in the United States when people were very frightened of Ebola, even though most people's favorite movie stars had married more people than Americans had died of Ebola. But the risk was so available in the mind that people were frightened of a statistically low risk. If you can't think of a risk coming to fruition, then you may have unrealistic complacency rather than excessive fear. Probability judgments often go awry because we think what's cognitively available is a good predictor of what's the truth. Okay, unrealistic optimism. No one came, by the way. That guy's still there. About 90% of people think that they are better than the average driver and less likely to be involved in a serious accident. If you take an average couple and ask each member what percent of the household work they do, if the number isn't over 100%, you have a most unusual couple. College professors, we're at a university, professors, 94% think that they're better than the average professor. With respect to risks of various sort, people tend to think that they are more immune than the average person from the risk. Now, there's actually a neurological foundation for this as well. If people hear that the world is a little better for them than they expected, they get statistical information, they update. They bring their beliefs in line with the happier reality. But if people hear that things are a little worse than they thought, they dismiss the information. And we know that there's a part of the brain that actually disables incorporating bad news. And if you zap it, if you put a little electric shock to that part of the brain, then people incorporate the bad news. It's probably good that people are optimistic. It helps them do good things, but it can get us into serious trouble. Okay, how many of you have seen the invisible gorilla experiment? Okay, a significant percentage. I'll just tell you very briefly, this is an experiment in which people have to pass basketballs. The task of the observer is to count the number of basketballs. After the experiment, you were asked, did you see the gorilla? I was a participant in one of the experiments, by the way. When that question was asked, I thought, this is a joke. Of course, there was no gorilla. And while in most groups, about 50% of people don't see the gorilla, in my group of Harvard professors, about 99% of people didn't see the gorilla. There was only one person who said, "I saw the gorilla," and we all thought that person was joking. But there is a gorilla, and this is revealing about the nature of human attention. Incidentally, the gorilla experiment is so powerful. I have a daughter who's 3. I also have a daughter who's in her 20s. I told her what I just told you, and then she said, "Let me see the tape of the gorilla experiment." I showed it to her, and then she said, "Where was the gorilla?" Even knowing about the gorilla, if you're counting passes, you don't see it. I think this is profound, because when we're buying products or interacting with government or private sector, there are often invisible gorillas there, and we just don't see them. Okay, there's loss aversion, which I told you about. I'm going to give you 2 little bits of data that I think are inexplicable without an understanding of loss aversion. Everyone in this room knows about golf. There's not one person who doesn't understand golf. Okay, there's one person who does. I'm sorry, I'm going to completely lose you right now. Here's data from thousands, many thousands of observations. When professional golfers are putting for par, they do better than when they're putting for birdie. If professional golfers putted for birdie as well as they putted for par, if the average golfer did, he or she would earn a lot more money. That's bizarre. A stroke is a stroke. Why do you do better putting for par than for birdie? Here's an experiment seemingly far afield. This is also real-world data. If you tell teachers that at the end of the year you get a bonus if your students' math scores go up, the evidence is very mixed about whether the students' math scores go up. That policy intervention, which on the incentive theory should work, has very mixed results. It's reasonable to say it just doesn't work. But if you give teachers money at the beginning of the year, significant euros, and tell them if the students' math scores don't go up at the end of the year, they're going to have to give that money back, guess what happens? The scores really go up. Both the teacher story and the golf story, I think, are stories of loss aversion, where if you get the money at the beginning of the year, you want to hold on to it like a tiger, even if it means you're working super hard to get the students' math scores up. And that's how golfers are putting for par. If you lose a stroke to par, that's kind of devastating if you're a professional. If you miss a birdie putt, it's not good, but it's not devastating. Loss aversion can be triggered simply through description of a problem and through creative use of policies. Here, I guess, there's a policy for a very small payment if you ask for a plastic bag. That tends to have a very large impact, whereas if you tell people if you bring your own bag, you'll get a little money, they don't care about that. Loss aversion. Okay, here are some behavioral science claims from basically 2000 to the present. Default rules really matter. The initial establishment of what happens will have a massive impact typically on what ultimately happens, even if people are given the opportunity to opt out. I'll give you data in a policy context. In Germany, very recently, there was an experiment with tens of thousands of households in which about 20,000 were automatically enrolled in green energy and told they could opt out easily. It's a little more expensive. Another 20,000 were automatically enrolled in less expensive, environmentally worse energy and told they could go green if they want. The prediction of a Nobel Prize winning economist is that opt-in and opt-out should have exactly the same impact. People will end up in the same place. They'll do what they want. The prediction is false. You get a tenfold increase in use of green energy if people are automatically enrolled in it, subject to opt-out, compared to a situation in which they have to opt in. I think most strikingly, under the opt-in system, where the default is not green, a great predictor of whether people are going to go green is whether they're in the Green Party. That's not amazing. That's not going to win anyone a prize. But under the opt-out system, whether people are in the Green Party has no predictive power in determining whether they're going to end up green. None. Default rules matter. Incentives may not always matter much. Think of the teacher study where it didn't really matter. Choice architecture is really important and you can't avoid it. By choice architecture, what's meant is the structure against which people make their decisions. Is the candy bar in a green wrapper or is it in a brown wrapper? If it's green, people who care about the environment will buy it, more likely, even if it's milk chocolate and caramel. Do you sign a form at the beginning or at the end? The data suggests that if people sign the form at the beginning, they're less likely to commit fraud because their honesty is on the line. At the end, there's a little bit of a yeah, whatever feeling. And there has to be some place people sign the form. Okay, people can use a nudge. It might save their lives. Simplicity is important, and attention matters a lot. That's an emphasis on where people's eyes are placed. This last point is actually something I understand now much better than I did 6 weeks ago. The president I mentioned issued an executive order on behavioral science. At the session, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman spoke, and he said there are these old studies that suggest if you want people to do something, there are two things you can do. You can push them, or you can remove the resistance they're already facing to doing the thing. You can push them to do the thing, or you can take the resistance away. The resistance may be some sort of burden or cost. It may be psychological. He says the systemic finding is, other things being equal, take away the resistance. Don't push people. That has the bigger impact. Okay, here are 3 representative problems. Smoking, excessive drinking, and obesity. Last month, the Irish Times, Ireland said to be most obese country in Europe, according to the WHO. Irish men are at the forefront of the trend. That's not good news. Let's get rid of this slide, shall we? Okay, GPS is a nudge. It steers you in the direction that you want to go. You are in charge, and you can ultimately reject the direction it specifies. That's a nudge. This is my only scandalous nudge, so this is basically a child-safe talk, but this one is off-color. It's a urinal. But it's not just any urinal. This is a urinal at the Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands, and there's a fly painted on the urinal. The goal of the painting of the fly was to reduce a problem, spillage. Some women in the room are nodding. The consequence of the painted fly was to reduce spillage by 44%. Apparently, men can't help but aim at it. And this tells us something about attention. Okay, this is from Germany. It's a real postcard someone sent me. I don't think you need to read German to understand the problem here. Okay. Automatic enrollment and savings. The savings issue is dealt with differently in varying countries. So think of this as you would, if you would, as both a potential approach to the savings issue and something that's, very generally generalizable. In the United States, there has long been a system in which people can opt in to a savings plan which supplements government pensions. The savings rate, you can see in the blue colors, goes up as people are higher in the income scale, the participation rate, but it's very low at the poorer end, and it's not unbelievably high at the wealthier end. Now, this is important because if you're in one of these plans, you're going to be a lot better off in retirement. It's a very important supplemental program. Notice, if you would, that under automatic enrollment, where people are just in the system, they can opt out if they want, it's a nudge, you're seeing massive increases in participation rates, especially people at the lowest end of the economic ladder. And that means people who really have a terrible struggle in store for them at an older age, they're going to be much better off. Okay, behavioral science and the environment. I told you about the German study. I want to give two notes about this. One is that a quick way to nudge people to save paper and money and to be environmentally better is to have a double-sided setting on printers. That can save at an aggregate level a significant amount, and it's much more effective than taxing paper use. It's much, much more effective than moral suasion, encouraging people not to use paper, which has, guess what effect on paper use? Zero, none. Okay, a nudge is a feature of the environment that affects choices without imposing coercion or any kind of material incentive. Reminders, drawing attention to social norms, portion sizes, warnings, and disclosure, those are nudges. A jail sentence, a fine, a subsidy, and an incentive, those are not nudges. Okay, who nudges? This isn't a very sophisticated slide, but it's heartfelt. That's who nudges in free societies. Okay, behavioral science might be used on behalf of democracy. Do you have here something where people are automatically registered as voters, or do they have to register? They have to register, okay. Many nations, including the United States, you have to register. That can be a problem, either a little problem or a significant problem. Oregon recently adopted automatic voter registration. If you are known by the state of Oregon to be eligible to vote, you are a voter. You can opt out if you don't want to be. It's automatic. That is expected to add hundreds of thousands of people to the voter rolls. California, just within the last few weeks, did exactly the same thing. With respect to most things that involve our rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, you don't have to register for that. You have that by default. The question is whether there are other things that bear on self-government, including voting, where the same should be true. Open government is central to democracy, and open government can be produced or spurred by choice architecture. Democracy may ask for behavioral science. I referred to data from the US and Europe. This has not been studied in Ireland, to my knowledge. But what people like a lot, meaning very strong majorities, tends to be everything in the domain I've been discussing thus far. Automatic enrollment and savings, people like that. Calorie labels, people are in favor of that. Automatic enrollment in green energy, people are in favor of that. They don't much like subliminal advertising. They consider that manipulative. They don't like being automatically presumed to give money to charity. They hate that. They want to give money to charity only if they want to give money to charity. There seems to be an international consensus that people ought not to lose resources unless they've affirmatively indicated their consent. That's a restriction on the permissible domain of nudging. Okay, here's a little tale. This is not a real picture. It's kind of, I just put my face on someone else's body. And the reason the tale is instructive, I think, is it tells something about our president. This was during our government shutdown a few years ago. Things were, not normal. The government shut down, things are not normal. But some of us got to go in for various reasons. See how much I love my job. But I unconsciously just said some of us got to go in. That's how it felt. And I was walking from the old executive office buildings, the Eisenhower building, which is right next to the White House, across to the White House, and I heard someone calling my name. And I turned around, and there was the boss. And while I had the privilege of teaching with him at the University of Chicago, we were on the faculty together, For him just to call you when you're walking outside, that doesn't really happen. But what he wanted to talk about was our regulatory system and ways that we could simplify it and make it easier for people to manage. And the fact that he kind of kept me there for 10 or 15 minutes in the midst of a government shutdown, that showed something about his focus on things, including behavioral issues, which he knows well, and it helped produce some of the things I'm showing you. Okay, here's an example. Poor children in the United States, and I bet this is true here, if you don't have any money, can you get free school meals? Is that true here? Some of you are nodding. Okay, what we had is a system that has great motivations, but the parents aren't signing the kids up. Why aren't they signing the kids up? They may be frightened, they may be confused, they may be really busy. What can you do about that? You could send them notes saying, please sign up, it's a free meal for your kids. You could try to scare them. That might be counterproductive itself. What we did instead was to say, okay, if we know that they're poor and we know where they live, they're directly in. The result is to certify 12.4 million children at the start of 2013 through 2014. Just a simple switch and choice architecture is giving millions of kids nutritious meals. I mentioned Oregon and automatic registration. I mentioned Germany and green default. I mentioned single-sided defaults. The Affordable Care Act, the very controversial Obamacare. During the original debates on that law, some of the Republicans called me and said, we don't like the idea that Americans must have health insurance, but we do like the idea of health insurance. Why don't we automatically enroll people in health insurance, subject to opt-out? Now guess whether I could have those conversations. No, I was working for the president. I couldn't have those conversations. But those were very interesting ideas, and some people believe that's a good way to go. And actually our law includes automatic enrollment as a supplement to the individual mandate. Now, what I'm hoping you're thinking here of other areas that private or public institutions make people to do things where it might well be preferable automatically to assume that and to let them opt out if they don't want to. Okay, plate not pyramid. This is the slogan I had in my government experience. I still have it in life. It's good for a parent, it's good for an employer, it's good for a student. This is the principal icon our government had to encourage people to eat healthy. There's a person, gender unclear, man or woman, who knows, no shoes, walking to the top of a pyramid where there's a little white triangle. Imagine you're a student or a parent or a teacher. What's that person walking to? Is that triangle death? Is that thinness? Is it heaven? Why does the person not have shoes? If you look at the stripes, which are supposed to connote food groups, do you understand what that blue one is connected with? Do you see the foods? I work on this stuff. I have no idea. Do you recognize any of the foods? I recognize only one object. On the bottom right, if you look carefully, that's a shoe. Is the US government telling citizens, eat shoes? We eliminated that and got the food plate instead. The food plate now has taken over much of American culinary thinking, where it basically says make half your plate fruits and vegetables. And we have dented the problem of childhood obesity after a long period of bad results. The denting can't be reliably connected to the food plate, but the food plate is part of a series of nudges which probably are helping to produce the denting. Now the slogan, plate not pyramid, means sometimes people's resistance to a change suggested by a private or public institution is a product not of resistance, but of incomprehension. People don't know what they're supposed to do. I had a friend engaged in a very important international negotiation when I was in government. And it didn't involve Syria. It didn't involve Russia or the Middle East. But it was important. And the president was going to go to that country. And before the president's visit, we had nothing. There was no agreement on anything. That's not good to have the president of the United States going somewhere that's kind of tense and there's nothing that comes of it. So my friend actually went there before the president went to try to negotiate something. And things looked bleak. And I had a phone call and asked late in the negotiations, how are things going? And the answer exploded over the international line, great. That was very surprising. And I asked, how come? How did that happen? And the answer was plate, not pyramid. I was as confused as I think you are. I said, what does that mean? And the answer was the reason things were going badly was the United States had presented this to the other country. They didn't know what we were talking about. Once we gave them a list of 8 things we hoped they'd do, they said, oh, 6 of those are good. My experience in the federal government with federal regulation was a significant chunk of negativity toward regulatory activity is that when people see the government's action, they see this rather than this. Okay, behavioral science and cafeterias. This is, I think, a very exciting set of initiatives where you just redesign a cafeteria so healthy foods are accessible and easy to get. We're seeing terrific results from cafeterias that are nudging people toward healthy foods without eliminating freedom of choice. If the brownies are there but toward the end, you'll get less brownie consumption than if the brownies are there at the beginning. Okay, this is small print, and this is the Federal Reserve, so I'm afraid you're going to fall asleep. No pictures. And here's a problem. Banks in the United States have put people in automatic overdraft protection. What that means is if you go over your checking account, you automatically get the money out of the ATM, but you're paying a very high interest loan. Automatic overdraft protection. The problem is a lot of people who don't have money are paying significant amounts in extra sums because they're in the program. Our Federal Reserve said you're going to be protected because you have to sign up for the program. You're not going to be automatically in the program. And the result of the compelling sign-up, rather than allowing automatic enrollment, has produced significant savings for consumers. The President said in 2010, employees will be automatically enrolled in workplace pension plans and will be allowed to opt out if they choose. This is just a recognition of the value of automaticity. Here's a slogan that I think deserves international attention. Our Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has an idea, know before you owe. And the basic notion is that if you're going to be taking out a mortgage or a school loan or whatever, you should know what the terms are exactly and be able to engage in comparison shopping. It's a nudge. People, if they want to owe a lot, they can, but they ought to have knowledge. They ought not to be faced with invisible gorillas who start beating their chests 5 years into the loan. In 2014, our Food and Drug Administration proposed to revise its nutrition facts panel. The basic idea was to make things simple and clear so that people know the nutritional content of what they're buying. This has a lot to do with the obesity problem. The Open Government Partnership, which Ambassador Power was heavily involved in, is designed to use openness to combat corruption and to promote accountability. If you see these words, this is using transparency as a nudge. And on the topic of behavioral science and its compatibility with democracy, here we see behavioral science being explicitly invoked in the interest of self-government. There's no tension. The idea of behavioral science is to promote democratic ends. In 2014, our Food and Drug Administration called for calorie labels on menus. You can think of this as a form of openness to make markets work better. Okay, here's new goals in fuel economy. You can see for environmental reasons an astounding increase in fuel economy in the United States in a relatively short time. And that is behaviorally informed, as we'll see. Okay, if there's one slide you remember, I hope it's this one. This is my favorite of the bunch. The word yes, of course, I have to say, but there's data here that is, in my view, surprising. In Denmark, automatic enrollment in pension plans has had a much bigger effect than significant tax incentives. That's a very jarring sentence. Remember the early slide? If you want to increase behavior, increase incentives, it shouldn't be that automatic enrollment, where people can easily opt out, has a bigger impact than tax incentives. As a longtime University of Chicago person, I can't believe I said the sentence that I told you, but the data is clear. Our credit card law, enacted in connection with the financial crisis, is designed in part to make sure people know before they owe. It's a set of nudges, disclosure requirements, saving consumers over $20 billion per year. For helping people to get money to go to college, there's a federal form, it's called the FAFSA. Simplification of the form has the same effect as increasing the subsidy by several $1,000s. Imagine you're a government that is not happy with budget increases. You have two approaches: simplify the form or give everyone several $1,000s more. Equivalent. The form simplification's better, yes? There's a company, O-Power, which gives people a home energy report. Is this familiar? Home energy report, which tells you how your energy use compares with that of your peers. The consequence of the energy report, which is very short, basically says you're doing great or not. If not, it tells you how you can save energy. It's the same in producing energy conservation as an 8 to 20% spike in the cost of energy. It's a choice architecture intervention with the same effect of significant incentives. Okay. Is nudging tyrannical? This is the Libertarian objection. The problem with that is that what the great John Stuart Mill didn't quite see is that choice architecture and nudging are unavoidable. There's a joke that I think is there's only one behavioral economics joke, and I'm going to tell you. There are two fish swimming in water. What else would they swim in? A big fish passes them by and says, "Howdy, boys, how's the water?" And as the two fish swim past the big fish, the older of the two says to the younger, "What's water?" And the point is that we are in a choice architecture often that is invisible to us. Mill also missed the behavioral failures to which I referred. Okay, is behavioral science undemocratic? What if it promotes democracy? Think of the open government partnership or automatic voter registration. What if people want it and it's supported and ratified by democratic will? We seem to have an international consensus. What if it's fully transparent, as all of the examples I gave are? None of these is hidden. All of them are subject to public scrutiny. It is true that behavioral science could be used for evil or undemocratic ends, but that's not a problem with behavioral science. That's a problem with the ends that are sought. A mandate or ban can be used for evil or undemocratic ends. It happens all the time. Okay, are stronger tools better? In Europe, I've heard sometimes that it's valuable to have coercion or economic incentives, not nudges. That's true, but given the fact that government or business may be biased or ignorant, it's good to have approaches, isn't it, where freedom of choice is used as a safeguard. Freedom of choice is an ingredient in welfare, and it often reflects an appreciation of human dignity, that if people want to go their own way, they can. I confess my own uncertainty about whether the foundational value for proper uses of behavioral science is human welfare or is human dignity. It works either way. Okay, is nudging manipulative? And it better not be. An energy efficiency label doesn't manipulate anybody. Information about credit card usage or social norms, a default rule, these are public and transparent. Okay, I have a couple things with which to end. Okay, this is a little bit about the future. Okay, here's one reason the invisible gorilla thing seems to me profoundly important. Each of us in our minds has a bandwidth restriction. We can't think about everything at once. That's not possible. If you are busy, hungry, poor, lonely, in love, your mind will be occupied by that thing. There is a commonality among the multiple sources of bandwidth limits that human beings face. Now, of these, the most poignant is poverty. Here's what happens to IQ. If you give poor people a test, an IQ test, they tend to do pretty much as well as people who aren't poor. That's just what we found. IQ tests, pretty close. If you give poor people an arithmetic problem first, that's kind of hard, and give non-poor people the same, tests, IQ tests that follow, basically similar. No big disparity. But if you give poor people a financial problem, meaning their car is damaged and they need to come up with €1,500 to fix it, and then ask them to take an IQ test, the IQ plummets. If you ask rich people how to come up, or non-poor people, how to come up with €1,500 after their car is damaged, their IQ isn't affected at all. The effect on the IQ of poor people is the equivalent of the effect of the IQ on everyone else of having no sleep the night before. It's a massive effect. What's going on there? If you lose 8 or 9 IQ points, that's a very severe diminution of your cognitive capacity. What seems to be going on, if you ask people who are poor to solve an IQ, to solve a hard financial problem, they're depleted. They lack the bandwidth to do the IQ problem. They're overridden by a problem of scarcity. Now, I think that has large implications for how we think of poverty in general. Compliance with medical requirements in order to keep healthy is something that poor people struggle with much more than people who aren't poor. Is that because they're irresponsible in bold letters? I think so. It's because of a scarcity problem. Governments all over the world dealing with poverty often impose on people, to a greater or lesser degree, requirements of various sorts so they get the stream of benefits. Those requirements deplete bandwidth and make the problem worse. They may be undermining the very capacities that programs to help poor people are designed to promote. The persistent problem of take-up of programs, and I'm confident this is true here as well as in other nations, is often a problem of scarcity. Make things more automatic. Okay, so what we've learned is to identify behavioral market failures. There are a series of obstacles to well-functioning markets that are not standard economic obstacles. They have to do with unrealistic optimism, present bias, dealing poorly with risks, loss aversion. We can expand the catalog of policy tools and match the failures to the tools. I have 2 notes by way of conclusion. One is from the great William Blake, commenting on Sir Joshua Reynolds. saying somewhat unkindly, to generalize is to be an idiot, to particularize is the alone distinction of merit, general knowledges are those knowledges that idiots possess. Those are strong words, and you'll notice they're self-contradictory because he is generalizing and offering some general knowledges. Nonetheless, in terms of coming to terms with the democratic and other concerns about behavioral sciences, I think this is a very important cautionary note. Let's be very particular about what we're talking about. An even better one from one of the greatest of all Irishmen, Yeats. Do not wait to strike till the iron is hot, but make it hot by striking. That's the final word. Thanks.